What's up, guys? We're back. Coach Ronnie, we're going to answer another question specifically for baseball players here. So the question is submitted today by Jack, and his question is, what is a drill that can help me use my hips more and not drop my hands? Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the second part of this question, which is dropping your hands. So that's more of a technical thing you need to work on as far as your hitting. It's something that I think a hitting coach can better help you with that, as far as making sure your hands are in the right position when you're going through your hitting. But to the first part of your question about using your hips more. Now, I have a couple of exercises I'm going to recommend for you to do as part of your training, but I just want to highlight the importance of the hips when it comes to hitting and pitching. Specifically hitting. When we think about hitting, we need to understand that the hips help generate a ton of force. So when you look at the anatomy of a body, the hips and the legs are where your biggest muscles are. And because you have the biggest muscles in those areas, then those are the regions and areas that you need to be training, developing, and incorporating when you're playing on the field, because the bigger the muscle, the more potential to express force and strength if it's trained correctly. So, very important that we train our hips, make sure those are strong, and that we're using them effectively. I want you to think about hitting from a position where you can't turn. So imagine being in the batter's box and being told that you could not rotate and turn your back leg and your hips. How far would you hit the ball? Not that far. But if I then allowed you, I unlocked the ability for you to turn your back foot, turn your hips, and as a result, have a little more velocity in your swing, what ball would you be hitting? What type of ball would you be hitting? How far would you be hitting that ball? Obviously, you would be hitting it a lot further than when you had your hips and your legs locked and not allowed to be used in the swing. So with that simple idea, the value of the hips in the act of hitting is critical. So make sure, if you're an athlete in the weight room, that you are consistently training the hips and the legs. Another good aspect of the legs and the hips is their ability to take a lot of volume. Essentially, you can train them consistently, frequently, and with a good number of reps and sets. So you can push the hips and the legs because they're such a big muscle groups, compared to something like a bicep. So the bicep is not, comparatively to the legs and the hips, is not a big muscle group. So my ability to train it is going to be lower compared to the legs and the hips. I'm only going to be able to do so many bicep curls or bicep exercises before it fatigues and it runs out of ability to work out. But the legs and the hips, there's so much there. There's so much musculature. There's so much muscles that you can train in a variety of ways. So you have the ability to train legs and your hips a lot more frequently than a smaller muscle group like the bicep. So again, the hips, a must for baseball players. You have to be training your hips consistently. So when it comes to using your hips more in the baseball swing, I think we need to consider how often you've been training. I'm going to answer this based off the perspective that you are newer to strength training and you're just getting started, okay? So one of the best exercises that you can right off the bat introduce into your training is the kettlebell swings. So the kettlebell swing is going to demand, if done in the way I'm talking about, where it's more of a hinge pattern. You're not squatting your swing, you're reaching back, you're hinging your hips back, keeping toes on the ground, and looking to load your hammies and your glutes. So that hinge pattern is going to allow you to use your hips in a more effective way compared to a squatting variation of the kettlebell swing. So with that in place, knowing that we're going to hinge when we do our kettlebell swings, the kettlebell swing is a wonderful exercise for you to understand violent hip extension. And if done in the Russian variation, so basically kettlebell to eye level, it's going to be a relatively safe exercise. The kettlebell swing. This is a great exercise to develop hip strength, explosiveness, and posterior chain development, so your calf, hamstring, glute. This is really, really good. And so this is how it's gonna go. You're gonna find a heavy kettlebell, and your stance is gonna be underneath your hips, maybe slightly out wider than your hips, double overhand on the kettlebell. Your goal here is to find the deepest hinge that you can control and have violent hip extension. So you're trying to maximize the speed in which your hips open, which means basically where you can find, again, that standing position. So a couple swings right here. This is what it looks like. One pro tip, make sure that you are keeping the kettlebell close to your hips at the end of your hinge. At the deepest point of your hinge. What tends to happen is the kettlebell gets closer to the ground, and that changes the pattern of your hinge. It almost turns into a squat. So by keeping the weight of the kettlebell closer to your hip, closer up to your hip, it's going to allow you to stay in a hinge, and it actually reduces the stress put on your back. Cool? So that is the kettlebell swing. So the kettlebell swing is a wonderful exercise, once again, to train dynamic or explosive hip extension, and it's going to be done in a way that is safe and easy to repeat for several sets and reps. Okay? So make sure you're doing kettlebell swings. Don't overlook the importance and how much you can get out of that. You're also going to get a nice conditioning effect from it if you do it for enough reps and sets. Okay, so that is the first one. The second exercise is the scoop toss. Now, the scoop toss is a good exercise because you're now being able to use your hips and that strength that your hips can generate in a manner that mimics, or at least patterns in the same way as hitting. So now we're going to load the hips and we're going to violently extend the hips, and with the goal of accelerating the med ball towards your target. Okay, so this scoop toss, the first variation is where you're wall facing, so you're squared with the wall. You're going to load your hips and then extend through. Again, it's now going to add a more rotational element to it, where your shoulders and your core are being, like I said, rotated. So now that is going to start to mimic more of that hitting position where you're having to load the hips and also start to turn the shoulders. The beautiful thing about the medicine ball is that it encourages acceleration through the entire range of motion, which is key to developing power that translates to the field. When you think about hitting, we want to think about accelerating through your swing, and so in training, we want to incorporate exercises that are going to also promote that acceleration. And then the third exercise is the lateral scoop toss. So this exercise puts you in the position of a hitter, and now you're able to rotate that back foot, turn the hips, and accelerate the ball through your target. So now you're starting sideways to your target. It's going to look a lot like if you're in the batter's box facing the pitcher. And again, the benefit here is that we're accelerating through the entire range of motion of every rep of this exercise, which is going to encourage you to do the same when you're on the field taking hacks in the box. So also the scoop variation with your hands underneath the medicine ball is going to reduce how much you use of your arms or your upper body. So it's not gonna make it easy for you to press through the ball. You have to literally use most of your core and your hips to generate any velocity behind the med ball. So that's another benefit of having the hands underneath the medicine ball. All right, the scoop toss. Here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna get in a good athletic stance. We're gonna be at 90 degrees facing our target. From here, your hands are gonna be underneath. Now, one of the benefits of the scoop variation is that it's going to put a little less stress on the elbow compared to the shot put. So what you're going to do and what you're going to feel is less speed on the med ball. It's not going to be as loud as if you were doing a shot put or an overhead slam, and that's totally fine. That's the reason I say that. Don't feel like you're doing this incorrectly if it's not as loud as the other ones. But Like I said, you're still going to get great core training. You're still going to get that hip-shoulder separation, and we're still going to get a lot out of this. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a load before each individual rep. So what the load is going to look like is your hips are going to be fixed, but you're going to load back. Your shoulders are going to turn back, and your eyes are going to be fixed on your target. So it's going to look like this. And at the end range of my shoulder rotation, I feel this tremendous stretch through my obliques, through my core, and that is preparing me to accelerate the ball into my target. So it's the whole thing is going to look like this. You really start to learn the timing of the load and the explosive rotation. So I feel the stretch and I start to time it. And you really want to think about the timing. So you want to really do a good job of timing the end of that stretch, of that hip and shoulder separation, and the positive move, which is accelerating through the med ball and into that target. That is going to help translate on the field. You want to do both sides. Start on your non-dominant side, and you want to focus on speed as always, and acceleration through the target. Rest as long as you need so you can keep that output and that speed nice and high. So those are the 3 exercises that I think will benefit you. I know will benefit you, especially if you haven't done them, to help use your hips more and train your body to depend on the hips to generate some power.